Got it. Okay, before we jump in here, want to see if anybody has ever heard of the Baron before, Escoutache. Is anybody familiar with him? One of those names of one of our people that it's not easy to get lost in the historical records. And it's sometimes easy for us to maybe ignore him, mainly because of a few things that he did. Sometimes it's just easy to ignore the bad things and only focus on the good things. So tonight we're going to look at Escoutache and get an idea of what he did. And just as we go through this, keep in mind that there are other similar events and there are other similar personalities that show up from time to time in our history that has some very interesting similarities to what we're going to talk about tonight. This one is something that happened very, very early in our history, and it could have done some significant damage to the tribe. But fortunately, at the time that we had Escoutache, we also had Condorcanq. And what we're going to look at to begin with is a little bit of the traditional setting that kind of allows for two different and total opposite personalities to exist within the tribe. So we have to take a look at our objectives to begin with. And objective number one is going to be the tradition of conflict. Then we're going to put together some historical background again to give everybody an idea of what's happening. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Baron, and this is going to kind of give up a little bit of what we're going to end up with tonight as a little bit of a closure, and it's the definition of a traitor. So jumping into the tradition of conflict, we have to begin where our story begins, and that's with the woman. And all of us here, I do believe, has a pretty good idea as to who our woman is. And we're not going to get too deep into discussing her, but we can just say that our woman is a perfect example of perfect imperfections. We have several different traditions that tell her story, and each one of them is a little different in the way that they approach what happened with the woman and the decisions that she made. Each one tells of a common theme that is pretty consistent with the woman who fell from above, and that she came to be pregnant with twins. These stories vary as to how she became pregnant, and our stories are also quite different from the other traditions of the other Iroquoian people. There is quite a bit of difference in the way that the Wyandotte look at the woman, and there's quite a bit of differences in the way that the Haudenosaunee look at their woman. And it's interesting to know that the woman, she ended up giving birth to twins. Well, we can say she sort of gave birth to twins before nature had been fully created. And it's also interesting to know that we know the name of the woman's twin boys. But when you look at all of our traditions and you look at our stories and you look at the history and everything that's been written, we don't know the name of our woman. She is basically unknown in our traditions outside of a name other than the woman. But knowing that we know her twin boys, we can look at the differences in the personality of the boys, and we can see a lot of conflict. There's Tiesta and Twiscare. The eldest is Tiesta, and he was naturally born, as all human children are born. Tiesta is also known as the man of fire. He's commonly referred to as our friend. And we have traditionally picked up the name as being the good twin for Tiesta. Twiscare was the youngest twin, and he was unnaturally born. Twiscare is known as the man of flint. He's also sometimes referred to as our enemy. And he is traditionally now today simply known as the bad twin. But there really isn't a good way that you can look at their names and express it as good twin or bad twin. The best way that you can look at their names is simply to define them as a friend or an enemy. Before the two twins were born, they were always taunting each other and they were bickering back and forth while they were still inside their mother's womb. As Twiscare was being born, he brutally killed his mother. Does anybody remember how Twiscare killed his mother? Does anybody want to tell everybody else? How did he kill
He
his
took his way out of her side.
Yeah. He was so defiant. He was so angry that his brother was born first, and he was born the natural way, that he decided to completely pick and tear and crawl his way through his mother so that whenever he was born, he came out of her armpit and she was instantly killed. The competition between the two twins was pretty great, and it was pretty severe, even as we noted before they were born, and also as they became children and began to grow. The competition between the twins was even greater as adults, if you will, when they became the creator spirits of the great island and nature. A war led between the two brothers, eventually led to Twiscare's death and the great flood that destroyed nature. And the next screen I'm going to show you is some of the different conflicts between the good twin and the bad twin, as we will call them. They are starkly different in the way that they approached the perception of life and what was good and what was bad. There really is no evil in Twiscare, and there really is no good in Fiesta. It's just the difference in the way that they manifested themselves to everyone. And a couple of things to point out, we won't look at everything here, but an interesting thing is that Fiesta, he actually created the Pataki, which is the little people. And Twiscare, he actually created the Hoodastru, which is the stone giants. And this is a quick little illustration to show the difference in the way that the two brothers thought and what they actually perceived as being something important. When you look at the little people, they were not dwarfs. They were just very small people, and they averaged anywhere from 2, maybe 2.5 to 3 feet tall. They were not human. They were humanoid in shape, but they were very small people with very great amounts of power. The Hoodastru, on the other hand, Twiscare's creation, were giants. They were monstrous in size. They were evil because they were designed to go and kill the Indians. And it's interesting how both twins took a different approach to some of their most powerful creations. The little people were small. They always went out in pairs of 2. The stone giants were demonstrative in size, and they always usually went out in 1. And there are many stories that tell how the little people killed the Hoodastru, but there is not one story that tell how the Hoodastru killed any of the Pataki. So the difference in the way that the twins thought is clearly expressed in the way that they created. And this is important because the way the people, the Indians, were created, it's also expressed within them in a pretty clear way. Reverend Finley, in History of the Wyandotte Mission, gave a really good description of the Wyandotte people. He starts with the way they look, he starts with the way they dress, the way that they perform their daily duties, and he ends it with this: they never forget to act in kindness, but will seek an opportunity to repay it. And I know of nothing that will be so effectually bid the Indian and make him feel his obligations as repeated acts of kindness. The word friend among them means something and will make them risk life and property to save a friend. But on the other hand, They never forget an insult or injury or insult, nor do they ever be at rest until they fully satisfy the passion of revenge and are untiring and always on the watch to execute their designs. So we today have those same characteristics. When we have friends, we're very loyal to those friends. A Wyandotte is a friend to anyone who wants to be a friend back. But on the other side, if they are an enemy, we have a history in the tribe of being very vengeful toward our enemies. And that is also applicable to the people within the tribe, our own citizens, who were not doing the right thing. And that leads us into our story of Kondarok and the Baron. And this is from On the Back of a Turtle, where I talk about them just briefly in the book. The relationship between Kondarok and the Baron can be described as good and bad, yin and yang, a balance of opposites, much in the same way as the good twin complemented the bad twin and vice versa. The Huron Wyandotte were noted as having balance, a nature of good and a nature of bad. This character trait can be seen within the tribe throughout history and was believed to be a reflection of the good twin's compromised creation of the great island after the death of his twin brother. So throughout history, we can see where these two character traits are always in display, and they're at conflict quite frequently within the tribe. And to be a friend, there was none better than the Wyandotte. And to be an enemy, there was none worse than the Wyandotte. So looking here a little bit at the historical background as to the setting of Kondarok and the Baron, we're looking at the Baron tonight. We can remember from last month in 1671, the Huron tribe resettled to the relative safety of Michilimackinac, and they went with the French Jesuits back up to the mission at St. Ignatz, and from there they began to merge between the Chianantati and the Wanro into one people. But one of the issues that eventually plays out over the next 125 years is that union between the two different peoples there was never fully completed. Many battles continued with the Iroquois in the east, and many battles continued with the Sioux in the west. And in 1675, as we saw last month, the Iroquois Confederacy focused its military might upon destroying the Miami and Illinois peoples. Problem is we were quite friendly with both the Miami and Illinois peoples at that time. The Hornet's Nest, as we pointed out last month at Michilimackinac, was a place where diplomacy and duplicity came from both all the tribes that were there and the French as well. The French were also involved with a lot of duplicity. In 1682, Kondarok rose to a position of prominence whenever he stepped forward to try and solve some of the problems that were facing the different nations there at Michilimackinac. In the late 1880s or thereabout, Escoutache makes a quiet appearance upon the political scene. So about the same time that Kondarok rises to a place of prominence, Escoutache is in the background just quietly observing and beginning to make his move. By the mid-1690s, a stalemate had been achieved between the Iroquois in the east and the Sioux in the west, and there was, for the most part, for the first time in quite a while, relative peace. This great achievement was not favored by Escoutache. In 1695, Escoutache makes his first attempt to upset the efforts and the authority of Kondarok. A couple little quotes here, one from Shovelox. This reverse was keenly felt, but they were so consoled by the perfidy of a Huron chief, styled by our Canadians the Baron. He was a dangerous man, and the French, whose natural enemy he was, did not sufficiently distrust him. So the French were incapable of seeing the danger that was right before them in the form of the Baron. The Huron village was divided between two rival chiefs, the Baron, who was deep in Iroquois and English intrigue, and the Rat, who, though once the worst enemy of the French, was now their friend. So the French was having a hard time figuring out who was friend and foe, who was good and bad. The Baron, we don't know when he was born. We have no clue when he was born. He is known as Escoutache, he is known as Escoutache, but those two names are rarely found in the historical record. To the best of my knowledge and through my research, there's only two references to those names. Most of the historical record always speaks of Escoutache, Escoutache as the Baron. The French dubbed him the name, and it stuck. And I like to follow through with things that you can find in the historical record so that people don't go out there and start looking for Escoutache or Escoutache and they don't find him because he's not there. He is referred to very, very frequently as simply the Baron. It's likely that the Baron was born sometime in the exile, the 30 years that we were in exile in Wisconsin. It's also likely that the Baron was born a Wyandotte. We have no idea to which clan the Baron belonged, and we have no idea when he died, although I think we can speculate pretty close as to when he actually died. We'll find that later toward the end of the slides. So the Baron was important enough to attend councils. However, he initially did not have much, if any, influence. The Baron sat quietly in council and always had his position toward the back of the council. And if everybody can remember the positions of the chiefs attending council, always started at the center where the council fire was, and those that sat on the front row were the most important chiefs. And as the importance of those in attendance began to lessen, those with the less authority and with a quieter voice always sat to the back of the circles that went out from the council fire. And the Baron, Escoutache, always sat toward the back, which means that he was not a very influential or powerful person. The Baron's role and position with the Huron tribe is unclear. We don't know if he was a village chief. It's highly unlikely that he was a clan chief because the clan chief would have sat closer to the front. He could have been a leading man. We really don't know what role he was, but we do know that he attended council. And through time, he began to move closer to the front of the ring. Like all the other chiefs and important men, the Baron publicly swore allegiance to the French. The Baron's Hurons, his fellow citizens, and all the other tribes knew that he was a snake and he was untrustworthy, but they couldn't prove the things that they suspected him of doing. He, nevertheless, concealed his intrigue with a dexterity and secrecy of which no one, scarcely but Indians, and especially the Hurons, are capable. So the Baron was very good and quite adept at playing that role of duplicity. Nobody really knew what side of the fence he was standing on. There was a council that took place where the Baron finally stepped forward and he was making a pretty good discourse as to why the different tribes should not support the Miami tribe. He was trying to position himself to give a lot of credit to the Iroquois for sending out a lot of wampum belts, asking for peace among the lake tribes and the other tribes in the region. the Baron was trying to be very delicate in supporting the Iroquois, while at the same time being very delicate at condemning the Miami. The problem is all the chiefs that were in attendance saw through his little game. After he gave his little speech, Big Head, who was a chief of the Ottawa, stepped forward and said, "Brother Huron, you cast a reproach on me. You say you conceal nothing. You are guilty of evasions. However, and though I hear all you say, I understand not all of it." So the other chiefs were beginning to see through this little facade that the Baron was putting out there. Shortly after Big Head made his little spat there at the Baron, another Ottawa chief stood up and he said, "Go scratch yourselves." He said that to all the Hurons in attendance. So you can begin to see that there's a little disdain that's starting to brew among the other tribes. Another Ottawa stepped forward and basically defended the fact that this wampum belt that the Baron was presenting to them had nothing. It was just a piece of sinew with beads on it. Be far from us this belt. Two of our chiefs, after having received sacks full of them from the Iroquois, had been killed the same year. So these belts were basically worthless, and what everything the Baron was saying was basically falling on deaf ears. He stepped up and he said, "Thus, brothers, are we pained by what is happening at present to our brother, the Miami?" Basically, you can translate as saying, brothers, do we really even care what's happening to the Miami? Do we care? They're not one of us, and why should we bother ourselves with them? And then Kondoronk steps up. Kondoronk basically put the Baron into his place where he rightly belonged. Kondoronk said, "We have but one cabin and one fire, and we ought to have but one mind. Let us unite. The opportunity is favorable. There is corn in the village to feed the women and children. We have brave warriors. What hinders us to die like men defending our lives? Shall we remain passive whilst our brethren are being carried off? I have confidence in the word of Quantosols, our ally." He was a Huron, "who, though a prisoner, exhorts us not to trust the word of the Iroquois." So here we have two different totally perceptions on what should be done. One, the Baron is saying we need to back off, basically toss the Miami people to the wrath of the Iroquois, while Kondoronk is saying we need to step up. We need to embrace them as friends they are. They are one of us, and we need to defend them with everything we got, even our lives. So all the other Indian tribes, the chiefs, are hearing this duplicity that's going on. They hear this lack of cohesiveness between the Huron people, who are considered the leaders, and they're getting a little disgusted with it. The Baron realized that he had been defeated by Kondoronk in debate, and he resorts to the use of a vision and superstitions. The Baron employed witchcraft to inhibit the Indian allies and his own people from defending the Miami people. The Baron told a parable about an old man and an old woman. And this parable shows how quickly the Baron was capable of adapting and coming up with something that he knew would be definitive. So the Baron told of this old man and old woman that was about 100 years old. This couple had been recently found living in isolation. They were Hurons who had been brought out from among the dispersal, and they went to a place and they just stayed by themselves. The Baron spoke of how this old man knew the master of life, how this old man had communed with the master of life, who back then was equivalent to the Great Spirit before the Great Spirit had been devised. And the Great Spirit demanded adherence to the black gowns, the Jesuits. So this 100-year-old man was basically telling how all the Indian people should follow what the black gowns were saying, But the problem is this old man had isolated himself and he had no contact with the black gowns to know what they were speaking. The people, so says the old man, if they didn't follow the wishes of the black gowns, then their corn would be destroyed. The black gowns at the time didn't want the Indians to fight. They did not want any war. They wanted everybody to basically stand down and find peace. So if the Baron could convince the people that the black gowns wanted peace, then the people had no other choice but to not fight. The Indian people, all of them, were very fearful of prophetic visions. And not one of the nations in this conference would step forward after the Baron presented this prophetic vision and bring up arms against the Iroquois in defense of the Miami people. So the Baron won. The Baron won out of trickery and the deployment of witchcraft. The Indian allies were becoming very suspicious and intolerant of the Hurons' apparent double standard. Conderonk was saying one thing and the Baron was saying another. The Baron's bold stance against the Miami people and in support of the Iroquois was bringing some unwarranted notoriety to himself and also to the Huron tribe. Conderonk's respect was becoming bruised and tarnished. No Indian will accept double talk and especially a forked tongue. So Conderonk was being diminished by the Baron. And that was the ultimate goal of the Baron. That was his goal, to shut down Conderonk. But it was even greater. The Baron wanted the destruction of his own tribe. The Baron wanted the Huron people to basically find themselves where they had no ability or desire to continue as a unified people. What he was wanting was the adoption of his people into the Haudenosaunee. He wanted to be the sixth nation of the League. The problem is the Haudenosaunee didn't want the Huron people to stand alone besides them. They wanted them to be dispersed and adopted into the League among the 5 nations. In a short time, the French began to suspect that the English had spies that were throughout Michilimackinac. They weren't throughout, they had totally consumed and saturated the whole of Michilimackinac, and they were brought in basically with the hand of the Baron. The Baron at this same time was conspiring with the Sioux to attack and destroy his own people. The plot was found out by Cadillac, and Cadillac shut that plot down. The Baron had conspired with the Iroquois to attack and destroy the Miami at the same time that he was plotting with the Sioux. The plot was foiled against the Miami by Conderonk. While the Baron was preparing to attack the Miami, he left Michilimackinac, he left his own people, and he went down to live among the Miami people themselves. Nobody would ever suspect him of doing anything wrong when he went down to the people who were taking the brunt of the wrath of the Iroquois. While living with the Miami people, the Baron sent some of his followers and some of his family to New York to finalize his plans of moving to Orange. Orange was a small little village that sat between, or just to the eastern side of the Seneca's land in New York. So while the Baron was planning all of his little deeds, he was looking for an escape out to go live among the Iroquois. The problem is, for the Baron, in 1697, the Battle of Lake Erie, the treachery of the Baron against his own people and the Miami people was fully and finally disclosed. At this battle, there were 250 Iroquois warriors that were defeated by Conderonk's 150 warriors. As the Iroquois were being defeated by Conderonk, he interviewed a few of the captives and found out the full plan of what the Baron was up to. And at that point, with the defeat of the Iroquoian army and the defeat of the Baron, the reputation and the respect of Gondoranc was restored among both the Indian allies as well as the French. But that was only the beginning of the Baron losing everything. After this battle, everything that he had built up was lost. The problem with the Baron was now he could never return to his own people because he was found out to be a traitor. He was marked a traitor, and traitors within the tribe by tribal law were marked with death. The Baron sought asylum among the Mohawk and eventually moved up to the region around Albany, New York. Once he made that move, he disappears from the historical record. It's highly probable, but there is no historical evidence to prove it, but it's highly probable that the Baron's sentence of death was carried out by a Huron assassin. Because remember from what Reverend Finley said, that the Huron Wyandotte people never forget an injury or insult, nor do they ever be at rest until they fully satisfy the passion of revenge and are untiring, and they execute their designs. So while the Baron was yet to be discovered, he was accepted into the tribe as a friend. Then once his ploy and his plot and his conspiracy was fully disclosed, he was accepted as an enemy. So there is the culmination of both the good twin and the bad twin rolled up into the core of an individual. And throughout the course of this year, we're going to see where this plays out several times with a couple of other people in the tribe. But this is one of the first examples of how we have at times been our own worst enemy. We haven't always been at the mercy of our enemies outside of the tribe, but we have been on numerous occasions at the mercy of our enemies from within the tribe. And as we always do, there's a bunch of sources if everybody wants to start digging that out and reading it. And now, hey, that's it. We're done. Any questions? This is something totally different than what we've ever talked about in the past. We're looking at our own internal problem this time with a traitor. Any thoughts or questions?
I know I learned a lot tonight. I appreciate it.
Has anybody ever heard of this story?
No, never heard of it before.
Yeah, it's one that doesn't get much publicity. However, as I did a little additional research a little bit yesterday, I found a couple of little blogs where some people are starting to pull this story out. It's very interesting how our history and our traditions and our way of life and our thinking has become quite popular in the last 20 to 30 years. There's a lot of people out there that's taken a deep interest in the Huron Wyandotte people, and little stories such as this that have been completely buried in oblivion have found their way to light. So in coming years, we might see other things about us become quite interesting to a lot of people, because we do have some very deep stories and a lot of life lessons that can play out for a lot of people if they fully divulge themselves into learning our story.
The thing that I was kind of wondering about, I cannot say his name right, Escoutache, is he seemed in it for himself rather than for the community.
Exactly. Yeah. He had nothing that basically endeared himself to his own people. He was out for himself. He was out for a little bit of his own family, but he totally defied the very essence of what made us who we are. And that was his loyalty to his clan, his loyalty to his people, his loyalty extended to no one but himself. And that's a tribal crime. It's treason. And I think he probably ended up paying the ultimate price for that, because that is something that is not tolerated within our mindset. So yes, he was all about himself.
I have a question for the whole group rather than Lloyd. Some of these traits I see in myself and I see other people, like my neighbor did something horrible and my father, sister, and I all thought of ways for revenge, which I'm probably not going to act on, but I try to rein that in. I'm wondering, do other people see themselves in these things?
I do.
Yeah,
Like you say, we might not actually go in and play out our thoughts. We may not make our plans come to fruition, but we think it sometimes. And if you could go back, or if you can dig out this description that Reverend Finley wrote of our grandmas and grandpas back in the 1820s, everything that he wrote back in the 1820s of the people that I know, you guys, it hits hard, it hit home. And it goes to show that who we are is deeply instilled within the very fibers of our essence. So, yes.
I see it at work too. Someone does something and they're suddenly, I have to work really hard to remain professional once they've crossed a certain line.
Yeah.
I'm very much the same.
Make him feel his obligations.
Yeah. We are Wyandotte. We are Huron. We're Wyandotte.
And will make.
That's who we are. It's how we're made.
I want to take that. I want to copy that. Copy. Can I make phone chat? Recording. Just copy that.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
And chat, share screen.
In a way, this is kind of sobering tonight, because it kind of makes us take a little look at ourselves.
Apps. I'll start the video. Shoot. Where's my camera? Oh, it's downstairs. I would take a picture of it. I don't have my camera.
there we go.
I'm kind of thinking it like everybody else. I found myself doing some of this at work or just other people in general.
Well, thank you, Lloyd. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording. I'm not saying everybody has to jump off. I'm just gonna go ahead and stop recording for now.
On the flip side, I also see the